The morning my husband called me from his brother's lawyer's office, I was replanting the rose bushes along our front porch, the ones I put in the ground 26 years ago when we first moved into this house. My hands were dirty, my knees ached the way they always do now, and the September air smelled like cut grass and something faintly sweet from the neighbor's yard. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. And then my phone rang. Dorothy. His voice was different. Clipped. Like he was reading from a script someone else had written. I need you to listen carefully. Richard passed away last night. He left everything to me. The business, the properties, all of it. We're talking about a lot of money. I sat back on my heels. Richard was my husband's older brother. They hadn't spoken in almost 4 years. Not since that argument at Thanksgiving that nobody in the family ever talked about directly. I said I was sorry for his loss. I meant it. I need you to understand something, he said, and there it was, that shift in his voice I'd been hearing in small doses for the past 2 years, the one I kept telling myself I was imagining. Things are going to change. I've already spoken to someone. I think it's best if you start making arrangements to stay somewhere else for a while. I need space to figure out what I want. I didn't say anything for a long moment. The rose bush I'd been tending sat half out of the ground, roots exposed, soil dark and damp around it. This is my home, I said. We'll talk about it when I get back, he said. And he hung up. I stayed there on my knees in the garden for a long time after that. Not crying, just thinking. 31 years. We had been married for 31 years. I taught 3rd grade for 28 of them. I packed his lunches when he was starting the landscaping company, and we couldn't afford to eat out. I worked summers to help cover payroll when his contracts fell due 2 years in a row. I signed my name on the loan that kept the whole thing alive in 2008 when the housing market collapsed and half his clients disappeared overnight. I had done all of that, and now he was calling me from a lawyer's office the day after his brother died to tell me to find somewhere else to stay. I replanted the rose bush. I finished the whole row. Then I went inside, washed my hands, sat down at the kitchen table, and tried to think clearly about what I actually knew. The house. I knew that much. We had bought this house together, but the mortgage had been refinanced in 2014, and when we did that, for reasons that had made sense at the time involving his business credit situation, the deed had been put in my name only. I remembered signing those papers. I remembered the closing attorney explaining it to us both. My husband had been there. He had nodded. Did he remember that? I didn't know what Richard had left him. I didn't know how much money we were talking about. I didn't know what arrangements meant, or who he had spoken to, but I knew one thing clearly. I was 63 years old. I had given this man the best years of my working life, and I was not going to make a single move without understanding exactly what I was entitled to. I called my daughter that evening. She answered on the second ring the way she always does, and when I told her what had happened, there was a silence on the line that said everything. "Mom," she said finally, "don't touch anything. Don't move anything. Don't agree to anything. I'm coming Saturday." "I'm fine," I said. "I know you are," she said. "I'm still coming." My husband came home 2 days later. He walked in with a new haircut. I noticed that first, the way you notice small, wrong things before you can face the larger ones. He set his bag down and looked around the living room the way someone looks at a hotel they're checking out of. We sat at the kitchen table. He had printed something out and he pushed it across to me. It was a list of what he believed were shared assets and what he intended to claim as his. The house was not on it. I don't think he remembered about the deed, or maybe he assumed I didn't know what it meant. "Richard left me just over $2 million, he said. "Between the sale of his property up in Vermont and the business assets, maybe more. I've worked hard my whole life, Dorothy. I want to enjoy what's left of it." I looked at him across the table. This man I had made a home with, raised a daughter with, nursed through a knee replacement and a health scare in 2019 that had frightened both of us more than we admitted. He looked like himself, and also like a stranger wearing his face. "Who have you been speaking to?" I asked. He looked away. "That's not the point right now." It was the point, but I let it go for the moment. I told him I needed time to review everything. I told him I wasn't signing anything. I told him, calmly and without raising my voice, and I watched something flicker behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that I wasn't crying, that I wasn't begging, I wasn't going to beg. I decided that the moment I put the phone down in the garden. My daughter arrived Saturday with a name written on a piece of paper. A woman she'd found through a colleague whose parents had gone through a complicated divorce 2 years earlier. An attorney in our county who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. Her name was Carol. My daughter had already called ahead. We met Carol on Monday morning in her office on the second floor of a brick building downtown. She was in her early 50s, gray starting at her temples, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She had a quiet way of asking questions that made you feel like every answer mattered, and none of it surprised her. When I finished explaining the situation, the phone call, the list he'd pushed across the table, the deed, she nodded slowly and wrote something down. "Tell me about the business," she said. "His landscaping company. Walk me through what you know." So I did. I told her about the early years, the summers I worked, the 2008 loan. And then I told her something I hadn't thought about in a long time, something I'd almost forgotten the way you forget the texture of a very ordinary day. In 2003, when my husband was trying to register the business as an LLC, there had been a problem with his credit. Nothing dramatic, some medical bills from before we were married that had gone to collections and never been fully resolved. The attorney handling the LLC registration had suggested that to avoid complications, the business be registered with a co-owner, someone with clean credit history, someone whose name could go on the paperwork without raising flags. My name. I had signed those papers too. In 2003, in an office not unlike this one, with my husband sitting beside me explaining. It was just a formality, just paperwork. It didn't mean anything practical. Carol set down her pen and looked at me steadily. "Do you still have those documents?" she said. I thought about the filing cabinet in our spare bedroom, the one with the green hanging folders I'd organized by year every January for 31 years. I thought about the 2003 folder and whether it was still in there. "I think so," I said. "That," Carol said, "changes things considerably. I want to explain something about what the next few weeks felt like, because it wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't feel powerful or victorious or any of the things you might imagine feeling when you realize the person who tried to push you out actually left all the doors unlocked. What I felt was tired, deeply, honestly tired, not of fighting, but of the fact that any of this was necessary at all. 31 years, and it had come to this. But I also felt something steady underneath the tiredness, something that had been there a long time without me naming it. I knew who I was. I knew what I had done with my life. And I was not going to let someone else rewrite that story just because they suddenly had money in their pocket. I found the 2003 documents on a Wednesday evening. My daughter sat with me at the kitchen table while I went through the green folder. The LLC registration papers were there, slightly yellowed at the edges, my signature on the third page next to my husband's. Co-owner. 23% stake, it said, which was what the attorney had recommended at the time for tax purposes. I took photographs of every page with my phone and emailed them to Carol that night. She called me the next morning. "Dorothy," she said, "I need you to understand what this means. 23% of a business that has been operating for over 20 years, with assets, equipment, contracts, and a client list that has real value. Depending on the current valuation, we're talking about a significant sum, and that's before we even discuss the house." My husband had retained his own attorney by then. There had been a letter delivered to the house, my house, as Carol consistently reminded me, because the deed was in my name, and that was not a minor point. The letter used language like equitable distribution and mutual agreement, and suggested I might want to consider a reasonable settlement rather than prolonged proceedings. Carol wrote back. Her letter was 3 pages long. I read every word of it twice. It was the most satisfying 3 pages I had ever read in my life. The part where she outlined my co-ownership stake in the business, citing the 2003 registration documents, the part where she noted that the marital home was titled solely in my name and therefore not subject to division, the part where she referenced my 31 years of documented contribution to the household and the business. She had asked me to write out a timeline of everything every loan I'd signed, every summer job, every covered payroll, and I had done it carefully and thoroughly. All of it was there. Calm and factual and impossible to dismiss. I am not going to tell you my husband took it well. He didn't. There was a phone call in which he said things I won't repeat here because they don't deserve to be repeated. There was a period of about 2 weeks where I had trouble sleeping, and I would lie in the dark listening to the house settle and wonder if I had made the right choices, not just now, but going back decades. Whether I had been too quiet for too long, whether I'd let things go that I should have named. My daughter drove up on a Thursday night just to sit with me. We didn't talk about the case. We watched an old movie and she made chamomile tea, and we sat on the couch in the living room the way we used to when she was in high school, and something had gone wrong at school, and neither of us felt like putting it into words yet. That night helped more than I can explain. Carol called me with an update the following week. My husband's attorney had reviewed the co-ownership documents and the deed. There was now a formal negotiation underway. His attorney had apparently been less than pleased to discover the paperwork situation. Carol said this neutrally, but I thought I heard something dry and faintly satisfied in her voice. He had believed he held all the cards. He had forgotten that some of the cards had my name on them. Here is what I want to say to anyone who was in the place I was in that September morning, kneeling in the garden with dirty hands while everything you thought was solid began to shift underneath you. Do not panic. Do not sign anything. Do not make yourself small to make someone else comfortable. Find out what you actually know, what you actually own, what is actually yours, because sometimes the person trying to push you out has forgotten or is counting on you forgetting exactly how much of what they have was built with your hands. The settlement took 4 months to finalize. I stayed in my house throughout. Carol made clear there was no legal basis for me to leave, and I didn't. I tended my garden. I had dinner with my daughter twice a month. I went back to volunteering at the elementary school on Tuesday mornings, listening to second graders read, and found that it steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. When the final papers were signed, I sat in Carol's office one last time and read through everything carefully before I picked up the pen. The house was mine, had always been mine, was confirmed mine. My 23% stake in the business had been bought out at fair market valuation, a number that surprised even me when Carol first said it out loud. There was also a division of the retirement accounts we had built together, and an acknowledgement. This part mattered to me more than I'd anticipated, an acknowledgement in the legal record of my contributions to the business over 31 years. Carol walked me to the elevator when we were done. She shook my hand and said, "You handled this well." I thought about what that meant. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I had gone home that Tuesday evening and thought clearly about what I knew and what I needed to know. I had made phone calls. I had opened a filing cabinet. I had sat in offices and answered questions honestly and let the facts do the work that facts are supposed to do. I had good help, I said. You knew where to look, she said. That's most of it. It is October now. The rose bushes along the front porch have finished their second bloom of the season. The mornings are cool and the light comes in low through the kitchen windows the way I have always loved. My daughter is coming for Thanksgiving, her idea, and when she suggested it, I felt something in my chest loosen that I hadn't realized had been held tight for months. I am 63 years old. I own my home. I have money in the bank that represents decades of work I did in good faith for a life I believed in. I don't know exactly what comes next, and I find that I am less frightened by that than I would have expected. I know what I'm worth. I knew it that morning in the garden, even before I had the words for it. And when the moment came, I didn't let anyone convince me otherwise. That, more than any document or settlement figure, is what I want you to take from this. Know what you have built. Know what your name is on. Know that it is never too late to stand in the middle of your own life and say, quietly, clearly, without apology, "This is mine, and I am not leaving."